Welcome to the Counterweight Podcast. I am Doug Rogers, Chief Revenue Officer and Managing Partner for Waypoint Healthcare Solutions. And I'm joined weekly by my co-host, James Kanary, founder and owner of the Upper Right Corner. Together, we are focused on speaking to and learning from growth leaders across the healthcare space about their journeys and lessons learned. James and I want to explore how growth leaders manage this tension, not only for their teams, but also with their leaders and in many cases, board members and investors. We will discuss with our guests the career journey they have been on, key influences that helped them put them into the position they are today. We will talk about successes and challenges, what they learned from these events for themselves and for their teams. Join us each week for a new episode with our guest. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn under the name The Counterweight Podcast. Subscribe, like, follow, and give us feedback as we go along. Now on to the show. We are super excited to have you here with us this afternoon. My name is Doug Rogers. This is the Counterweight Podcast. I'm joined by my co-host, James Kanary, the better looking of the two of us. So he's much more camera friendly than I am. What's happening down? Thanks. Low bar. We are just super pleased to have the discussion that we're going to have today. I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. What I would guide you as we go through this conversation, don't be afraid to ask questions. We've got some really good content that we want to make sure that they speak to, that they respond to, but we're going to save space for your feedback, for your questions as we get to the end. And certainly take advantage of these two individuals. They've got a ton of wisdom, a ton of experience I think you're going to see as we go through that. So without further ado, Matt, why don't you start, introduce yourself, and then we'll go to Michael.
Sure. My name is Matt Wilson. It's great to be here with everyone. Thanks to the Counterweight and Digital Health KC for having us. Matt Wilson, I'm the President and Chief Commercial Officer at Change.
Fantastic.
I'm Michael Coggins. I'm the CEO and co-founder of JANA, and also thank you to everybody for having me.
So I'm Matt for feels like a short amount of time, compressed in a lot amount of time. Just met Michael, and I have to thank Dick and Tanner and Liz for the introduction. And Michael, when we talked, which we just talked a week ago, you described to me the origin story around JANA, and I got to tell you, it was really compelling. Why don't you share with the audience, why are you doing what you're doing? And probably maybe start with what exactly are you doing?
That's all right. Great place to start. I was going to, as I said on our call, and echo, the first person to sit up here who didn't used to work for Cerner.
That's right. Absent common belief, that's not a precondition.
I'm glad I made it through anyway. Our platform, JANA, what we do is we turned a different style of care capture in nursing homes to help them automate and navigate the requirements of the federal government paperwork so that their reimbursement rates go up over time based on the individual interactions that we have on the floor. And so that's not how it started. I really wish that I heard Dick's speech about tapping into the payment streams about a year ago, because we started as a much more wide-eyed, naive idea that we can make this care capture system that will prevent the negative outcomes within nursing homes. Will prevent falls, will prevent bed sores, our elders will have better care taken over. And as we went out and we pitched that, I had a venture capitalist tell me, well, who's gonna buy that? And I say, well, I'm convinced that if we can make that the element of care, we can take care of our elders better. Someone is going to pay for it. And she said, I would like to think that's true, but you're being pretty naive. Laura, if you ever watch this, that's one of the most helpful comments anyone's ever given me, because she was right. I absolutely was. So we've tailored that to. We realize that as you do provide those care metrics that comply with the regulations, that automatically helps you build that reimbursement rate. And we can do that from the people on the floor up until those reports are submitted. But that isn't even the origin story. The origin story, and sorry, you take over anytime, but
Keep going.
Back in 2019, a friend of mine was the CEO of a retirement community, and they were spending a lot of time and effort trying to measure one thing with their residents. And they had expensive systems, they had devices in their hands, they had all this stuff, but to measure that one thing, they're writing it down on Post-it notes.
Seems like a good process.
Like,
Yeah, what could go wrong?
and you get the data back so quickly. And so it was great effort. They couldn't do anything with the information, and they were not even using the technology they had at hand. And so we wrote a really lightweight version of what Jana has become today to track that single element that is a precursor for a lot of negative outcomes and just show their team in real time. And then we started layering in, can you add elements of the care plan? Can you give them different alertings? Can we make this heat map of this type of activity? And it just grew and grew and grew until those are the things you need to do to navigate that government reimbursement. So,
And that was back in 2019. And so fast forward, it's not been a straight line from that inspiration, if you will, to where you are today. If I remember correctly, there was a pause and then you re-picked it up about a year or so ago. Is that correct?
that's correct. The line looks like Morse code.
Yeah.
Like it completed itself.
Yeah.
COVID happened and we were installed in one nursing home facility in Topeka. I talking right before we started, I don't think there's an industry that was hit harder by COVID than the nursing, from staffing to their residents, to the regulations they had to comply with, to being last in the pecking order to getting PPE and all of that changing every day. So as soon as COVID happened, they couldn't test our platform. They couldn't answer the phone, and so that wiped off. We just completely stopped at that point. And this is a complete aside, but I was running an online steak company at the time, and that put our connected down. And so that blasted off, and this idea stayed on the shelf for a while. And about a year ago, we a co-founder joined with me, and then our third co-founder as of last September. And that's when we really started taking off. We have a really solid team. I've been doing this on and off since that 2019 because I couldn't let the idea die. And then bringing the right people in place as we've really gotten founded and moving forward has been key. And we have.
It's incredible. Would you say that the stakes are higher with your current company?
These are life and death stakes.
Thank you.
There you go.
Dad joke, everyone.
Yeah, it is not. Yeah, one observation I would have, and then James, I'll turn it to you. I find it noteworthy that you had this idea, had receptivity from it, and the world took a pause. It is not to debate the impact or talk about what happened or didn't happen with COVID, but you fast forward 4 years, and as we've talked, what struck me is things had not changed systematically. You almost jumped right back into the same problem, the same issues. I hate to say it was a little disheartening. You read the news but you see all this innovation that's happening and all these companies that are starting this or that, and yet many of the problems are still the same. So I know we'll talk more about the journey, if you will, because I don't turn it.
I'm fortunate I get to introduce Matt. I had the privilege of working for Matt, and I began my career, it'll actually be 25 years ago this summer. That man over there interviewed me, and to this day, I'm still not sure why you allowed me in to start my career. And then shortly after, I had a chance to work both with and for Matt as we were growing the company at formerly Cerner Corporation.
Pledge Dad.
Pledge Dad, yeah.
I work for Dad.
Yes. It is fantastic. And if later on, we'll share some more stories about why I wouldn't eat a 12-ounce steak on an Arkansas visit, but we'll talk through that. Matt, we won't ask you to share the origin story of Spark Change because you weren't necessarily there at the time. You came into Spark Change, you made a decision, you got a strong background in healthcare, in growing companies, in being an entrepreneur. You could have done anything you wanted to do, and you chose to come to Spark Change. And I remember that when you were first getting on board. What drew you? First of all, tell us about Spark Change. What problems are you trying to solve? And then what drew you there and connected to your passions?
It's a great question. And then for me, it was a question I had to answer for myself, for my family, and what I wanted to go do. Cut to the end point because Spark Change had a better idea than I did. So where that kind of goes is So Spark Change, we are, if you want to pigeonhole through description, we're a revenue cycle performance improvement company. The fact of the matter is, universally across all venues of care, healthcare is plagued with kind of three universal truths. One, there is challenge in staffing the process of billing and collecting for care. Number two, and again, there's a rabbit hole that you can go down. Who's at fault? The fact of the matter is, insurance companies do make it extraordinarily difficult to collect on the care that you do provide.
What?
And then, and then the third thing, again, we won't get too political, but the third thing is healthcare has been plagued for years and years and years with boom bust cycles around performance improvement. It has largely been the category in which consulting fits into analytics. At some point, we'll do very expensive assessments that, are very long questionnaires and disruptive. And then magically we'll come up with, hey, you have a problem. They already know they have a problem. The question is, what do we go do about it? And what do we go do about that when we have few people to work on it? The people that do have to work on it are already working on something else. And you know better than I, so how about you fix it? So the world has been, a consultancy would fix it very, very profitably from their perspective. But when they leave, often everything regresses back to that pre-project state. So you're left in these booms and busts. The reason I came to Spark Change and what Spark Change does is we are sustaining improvement through the use of technology. So again, throughout the last 30 or 40 years, there are billions of dollars that flow into consulting, billions that flow into tech, and rarely do those lines intersect. And if they do, it's a direct overlap in which the consulting company is now implementing a system. So what Spark Change was able to do very, very early on was not intersect those lines, but organically intertwine them to the point that the team, and Chriselle Lackey, our Chief Operating Officer, is in the audience, and she was, I think, the fourth or fifth person. So literally in the basement. Michael, not a garage, but in a basement. But what they were able to do was say, hey, rather than starting with a big contract, rather than starting with, this leap of faith around technology, how about you just give us a problem? How about you give us a problem, let us solve that problem, and then give us another problem. And from there grew this culture of servitude and client-centeredness that I found to be extraordinary early on. And from those, relatively humble beginnings in a literally basement and then in Hy-Vee Arena, what we've now grown into is a company. We've got about 75 people. We are solving problems across the country with clients across the country. And we use a combination of analytics, which I'll tell you, this industry needs another analytics company like it needs a hole in the head. But we have these very purpose-built analytics that identify very, very specific problems and jobs to be done. Use automation, and automation in this industry doesn't have the best reputation. There are some very notable failures and $950 million worth of investment that went by the wayside. But the automations that Spark Change uses and Chriselle conceptualized, let's not use bots, let's go straight to a database and let's bypass the user interface. Let's not make ourselves subject to those challenges, and let's go fix that. So the combination of analytics, automation that perpetuate that change, perpetuate that improvement. I can identify a problem, I can fix the problem, I can leave the automation in place so that the next transaction and the next and the next will go do that, automagically, if you will. And then using that along with a very, very deep set of consulting chops and skills, that's how we've been able to kind of cross that valley of death, if you will, for a very young company, find product market fit, and then, continue to grow.
Fantastic. And the commonality of finding a specific problem, let's go solve it, right? You did the same, right? We're not going to solve everything. Let's pick this one, go down that road.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was, we got focused on, if my co-founders are watching this later, they're going to laugh at this part because I introduce scope creep every day. Let's do these three things. And they're very good at, Ali especially is very good at bringing me back to like the specific problem, but we only move fast when we can look at that one problem, solve it, and then move to the next. But I personally have a problem with.
Well, your primary role is chief disruption.
You, and then Matt, you've got just a tremendous amount of experience, especially on the go-to-market side, to also speak to. But as the founder, you helped build the first iteration of the product. You're sitting with these clients, but you're also really the chief sales guy.
Yeah.
What is that like? How do you navigate that aspect of the job? And are you a salesperson by background? Is this what you grew up doing? I mean, you're like, yeah, I know what I'm doing here. I'm going to go out and just knock this out of the park.
No.
Okay. But you're doing great.
Yeah, the affirmations. It's really helped. Yeah. No, I'm not a salesperson by trade, but we got started with the idea that we were going to give this away. And so when we give it away, and which we've done since last fall, we are learning every moment of what they actually need and want. And so, we pitched a platform last summer, and I started shadowing the CNAs who were we were trying to get them to work in a way that they just didn't work. And so it takes sitting there with them to be able to even have those sales conversations, because when they say, oh yes, I want this intelligence out of it, but I now realize that's not how your people work. So the sales part has become much more natural to me, instead of just, reading the books about commitment objectives and getting to this stage, and you follow the funnel and you do all those things. Those books are there for everybody, but that doesn't work if you can't speak to their experience, having, watch it for a while. And that has taken some time, and I spend a lot of time in nursing homes these days.
Well, so is it fair to say, and probably for the audience, there's no substitute for authenticity, and there's no substitute for being able to speak about, and with conviction, the problems that your clients are trying to solve and that they're seeing every day.
But there's something, so as they're trying to solve them, and, I see them one way, they see them another way. But I think it's really important to try and not only understand their point of view, but the way that you see the problem differently. So like if they're trying to do so, fix a problem, if you don't understand the way that they are, in your opinion, misinterpreting it, or, I find ahead of time about how it feels like some facilities feel like everyone's trying to put together a puzzle and they have a piece out of a different box and they just don't fit together. So if they can't see that, but they're trying to fix their little section, like you have to be able to see how they are misinterpreting the inputs and outputs to be able to make something that threads through to actually solve a problem in a way that they hadn't seen. I mean, you can't just say, do your job harder. Yeah. Do your job better. Like, no one wants to hear that. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, as a side, and then James, I'll turn it over to you. For all the salespeople in the room, take note, if you're the salesperson and you talk about scope creep, it's a bad thing. If you're the founder and you bring in scope creep, it's a great thing. That's right.
So building off of that, Matt, you came into a established company, and you mentioned the analytics plus automation, and then I think you made up a new word, automagically. So I wrote that. Did anybody catch that? So we're going to figure out, was that clear to you right away? Did it take some time to figure that out? And then how did you decide to package that up, take it to market? Because you can decide to go 100 different ways. You can't do all. So walk us through that process and what stood out to you, and then how you navigated that go to market.
So I mentioned they had a better idea than I did. And I had originally started out, I was working with a private equity firm on a thesis around sustainable performance improvement using process mining. And process mining is a relatively new technology. And we were looking at that when I was introduced to Spark Change and their leaders by Scott Hendrickson, for those of you who know Scott. And it was just, go have a conversation with them, cool young company, you'll enjoy the conversation. Was a group that the better idea was using analytics that were purpose-built rather than this process mining tool. But what I found, and to get the heart of your question, it didn't have to be apparent to me because they were doing it, because they already had clients, because they had already found market fit, or they had already found product fit. Market fit was a different animal, and that was a little bit of me being the first commercial, resource in there. But, what you had, and I know a lot of you will recognize this, anybody who declares to you that they can't sell, that they aren't a salesperson, is probably the best salesperson on the planet, right? And what you had was a bunch of people who culturally were so attuned to just going and solving a problem, so attuned to go finding a way to add value. Now, you talk about scope creep, and ask Christelle now, that leads to a lot of free work, right? And that leads to a lot of work that you're doing that you're not charging for. And while that makes it challenging early on, what it did was establish a loyalty and a brand inside of these clients. So when I came in, my job was not to screw that up, not to try and implement this set of hard-nosed sales tactics that, was going to make us the next company to just go pound on a door at the end of a quarter saying we must have this contract, but instead to do two things. And the way I described, early on, Sal and Dung, two of the primary co-founders, asked me, who can you introduce us to? And many of you are probably familiar with that, as you've either moved into retirement or as you've worked with and you're looking for these mercenaries. And my response was, guys, it's not who I can introduce you to. It's, can I introduce you to everybody? Can I introduce you to a model of, I describe it as market activation, where I'm tapping into, and candidly, the three names here were on my list, is how do you look for ways to go capture authentically what what others know, their connections, and to do it respectfully in a way that, your greatest IP is your network. That is your greatest IP. What you know is important, but who you know is more important. And then the power of a network and that, one plus is extraordinary. But for me, had I not had this team who had already figured out a way to provide that value, who had already figured out a way to repeat that value, that's important. Doing it one time is easy. Doing it over and over again, that's hard. So for me, it was about how do we go establish a framework, a go-to-market motion, if you will, that harvests the good that's been done already into those clients to be your best advocates, and that gets us to a place where we begin exercising some of the classic motions that a sales organization exhibits without pretending that we're bigger than we are and having a deal review with two people, right? On Friday afternoon at 6:00, so that was it. It was really understanding, this team had figured out how to meet clients where they were. For me, it was meeting this team where they were and then putting a plan in place that capitalized on that.
Awesome. And for those taking notes, Friday afternoon deal review, 6 p.m., not good. So we want to stay away from that. 5:30.
We've been a few of those.
Yeah, been a few of those. Comments, thoughts on that? Findings for you as far as go-to-market motion, kind of capturing that and elevating that and getting the team activated around that, including the client network. Just thoughts?
It's a little bit of a struggle when you're starting from scratch because you want to act like you are amateur. And so we put some things in place. We have deal reviews on Friday.
Gotta get the CRA.
Yeah, I do all those things. And actually, I've suggested we move it to Thursdays. So I think we're going to be a real big company. It's tricky to figure out. I feel like my time is most valuable when I'm actually at this, at least when talking to the people who are doing this job, and then to sort that out in hindsight of turn that into a process, make that into an actual funnel, and identify the steps as you're going through it. We do an exercise about the ideal client profile, and it's weird to be stuck in the middle where it's like you want to understand who that is and go get them, but you actually need to get that information and see it in the rearview mirrors.
Ideal client profiles fall apart when somebody calls you and say, "Can you talk to me?"
How much money you
Why do you
got?
want
It's a little bit different for us, but because we're trying to become, more like what you guys are doing.
Love what you just said, Matt, about ICP falls apart when someone calls you. I would go so far as to say that construct of how do you define who is most important is not a point in time. It's an iterative process.
Yeah.
And it's probably, I don't want to say it's a sign of maturity, but it's a sign that your business has grown to a point that you need to create more focus versus casting a wider net, if you will, in terms of who can I get this information from? Where can I find interest? What's going to happen here, et cetera.
And we work with a lot of nonprofits, and that means.
And when you say nonprofit, meaning a long-term care facility that is a nonprofit entity versus, let's say, a for-profit long-term care facility.
Yeah, we have both, but we started with a number of nonprofits, helpful for different reasons, but one, they're more likely to pick up the phone.
Why is that, by the way?
I don't know. Well, so like if they're a for-profit institutions, they usually operate more than one facility. So the people who are in those facilities don't feel like they have decision-making power, which they don't for a lot of us. And so getting to that decision maker is tricky. Either at some corporate office that's not listed somewhere, but in the nonprofit space, it's always a committee. Like there isn't, it doesn't feel like there's a decision maker that, I mean, it's like playing a video game where you have this boss and then you get to that boss and, you know, you get them all together and then have the conversation with them all at the same time. So it's, finding, you know, the ICP and all that is it's not easy. Yeah. So right now, I joke that my ICP is anybody's going to pick up the phone. And there are 16,000 nursing hires. So I'm like,
yeah, the thing, and there are lots of struggles as you know, being a small company, and we have a lot of them. Scale is hard. The thing, and I don't know if Crystal will nod her head or not, but the thing I think we struggle with the most is this concept. You talk about jokingly scope creep and focus. The challenge of just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. And, I'm really fortunate to work with an extraordinary group of people that are much smarter than I am and much more capable in so many different ways. And when a client asks, can you do this? Or a prospective client asks, can you do this? The answer is almost always yes. Because as long as they're in this locus of data and automation and process, the answer is going to be yes. But that leads you down paths that, create dilution of focus. And that dilution of focus is dangerous when you're a small company, even if they pay for it, right? And I think very early on, when you need to pay a light bill, that's one thing. But now when you're trying to balance all of these clients and all of these responsibilities and growth, it becomes almost a daily kind of challenge that candidly, I don't know that it changes that much when you get really big, but when you're really small, the stakes are higher. And that question is more important.
Well, and I have to imagine, and I'd be curious about your perspective. And part of what I love about this discussion, by the way, is very similar experiences, two slightly different places in terms of where Spark Change is and where
you are in the hardest position of all. And then this early team, I mean, this is so much harder than being here, but there are challenges.
I have to imagine, and I know I felt this as well, when you're in that early stage, that 0 to 1, and you both feel like you should say yes to everything, you kind of have the power to say yes to everything because you're just like, well, I want this business, I want that business. There's an excitement there. And because you feel like you're solving problems. And I'm curious, how do you navigate when you're 0 to 1? And then Matt, what's your experiences? Y'all have continued to grow there, Spark Change. How you keep that excitement when you have to introduce the word no?
well, I don't say no to anybody.
So that's the power of being 0 to 1.
That's not true. We had a number of people that wanted, when we were trying to get this away, a number of people said, a number of facilities, absolutely, let's do it. Let's get started. And it became clear that they weren't going to give us the time that we needed to actually get better. And so, we're not able to get into their systems with them, and they're not going to be partners with us and actually trying these things. We've walked away from some of that, even though with the intention of like, oh, this was going to fill the pipeline. We could convert them later. But, our first paid installation is 5-hour drive for me. I don't care. I'll do it on a regular basis. That part is a very different once I know on that side of the ledger, but we do need a certain amount of commitment from the other side of the table. And if that's not present, I don't even have to say no. It just dissolves. Yeah. And they, we'll set them these priorities. And if they don't come through with it, then, we can confidently say that it wasn't going to work anyway. Or they wouldn't, a lot, also parts that we recommend slightly different practices. And if they're not going to, it's the slightly different practices are based on the government regulations. So it's not like we're making these things up. But they, you need resources to do that. And so they would, even if they're not paying us, have to commit some sort of resource to being able to fulfill what we're trying to get them to accomplish. And so sometimes
It's a hard thing to do, though.
Absolutely. Even I'm trying to pay them, like I will come here. I will do this. I will try out that. And if there's not that reciprocal commitment, that we're not going to stick with that.
No. I think as you grow, as we've grown, I think having had couple minutes to think about it. I think it comes down to two things. Number one is having a leadership team that is open and honest with one another, in which hierarchy kind of goes out the window, and you can have honest dialogue about, whether that's something we should do versus something that we can do. A lot of those conversations are, it's, about humor and just being honest about, is this something we should be doing? But probably more important, and the thing that underlies that is you have to have a strong culture and know what you as a company are about. So for us, when it is, should we do that? Everyone at the company is centered by, will we continue to be able to deliver value to our clients if we do that, right? If we go down this path with Epic, if we go down this path with this particular service, if we go down this path with a group of people who are potentially disruptive to the culture and disruptive ultimately to whether we can continue to provide value, that's where no comes. And there is always, of the 4 or 5 people in the room, there's always a couple people that are on the side of, let's do it, right? But then you have that open, honest dialogue with one another. And again, humor comes into play most of the time to keep things light and fun. But at the end of the day, that client-centeredness can't just be a tagline. It can't be something that you fool yourself that you are, when so many companies, do, but they aren't. You have to make sure that you can continue to deliver on your core value proposition. And if that other thing that you're being asked to do, whether or not it's accretive to that, because if it's a right turn, then it's probably something you shouldn't do, at least not then.
That's your true north.
Yeah. That's our
to be able to filter and make those decisions. I want to get to some questions from our audience here in a moment. Before I do that, when you think about growing your companies and bringing on talent, we got a lot of talented people in this room. Some of them may be actually looking and thinking about their next move, or they know people who are. What are you looking for? What traits, characteristics are most important to you as you grow your company? And not specific necessarily to roles, but just the type of characteristics you're looking for. And that'll give our audience some time to think about some of their questions too. So Michael, I'll have you go first.
Test for this very well, but as we expand, we know the people we've identified them already. Being entrepreneurial. I've worked in sales organizations in the past as a project manager way back in the day. And, if you didn't hand them exactly what they needed for everything they're walking into, they're like, well, I can't have this meal. Like in our situation, you got to make that, you have to create that. You have to create, and be very flexible and nimble in terms of, learning the industry. People don't just walk off the street knowing things about nursing homes. It's not, and so you have to, being entrepreneurial, you wouldn't fit in our culture if you weren't, and there wouldn't be, you'd create your own opportunities and be able to roll with the punches of just being in a small organization. There's nothing that we can hand off to anybody without them being able to figure out how to solve some problems.
Self-starter, agility, flexibility, creativity. Yeah, sounds good. Anything different, additional for you?
Entrepreneurs, and we talk about this notion of scalability. And we think scalability is about having the right process, the right CRM, the ability to go do it over and over again. Scalability is about culture. And it's about having people that, once you expand beyond the founder and the original group of people who delivered all that value, if you don't bring the next person in that's willing to do the same thing for the same reason when they're not looking, then you've made a mistake with that person. So it's really all about making sure that you get somebody who's centered in the culture that you've created. For us, we are a bit of an anomaly in that we're an in-office culture. I made a terrible hiring decision with somebody early on that said that they were open and excited about being in the office, and they weren't. And again, there's a debate about office, in office, out of office, hybrid, whatever. But for us, we're in an office culture. I hired someone who was not culturally attuned to that, and they did not last very long at all, because it became apparent that they weren't going to go do the things that you're describing in order to be successful. So I think that culture piece and knowing what drives your company, I think, is so incredibly important, and then matching up with those people.
So we have some hands going up, Doug. I'm going to give you 30 seconds.
I will. This is the final liberty, and then we will turn it back to the crowd. You both have used the word culture, and I think we had a really good dynamic question around an aspect of culture. What I'd be curious, just before we take more questions, I'll talk about the intentionality, or lack thereof, of defining what your culture is. Because I actually think that's a really hard thing to do when everything else is going on around you. I don't know, Michael, if you want to start, if you have some reaction.
I don't know how I would answer that actually, but there are three of us. And one of my co-founders I've known for 20 some years, Ali, we've known since last summer, and we have very open and honest conversations and ensuring that like the focus is there. I mean, we're not in person with each other often. And so that like, we have to be pretty precise with our time together. And so, I don't know anything about like a grander idea of culture, but we all work very hard. We work very well together. We're respectful, but we will also disagree on a regular basis. And so out of that comes a lot of focus, and it has certainly created a lot of traction in what we've done. So perhaps we've stumbled into it well, or we're just all at that point in our careers. I mean, we're all up. But, this isn't, we don't have any children. I mean, we all have our own children, but we don't have any children.
So your children may work for you. Matt, anything you want to say there in terms of intentionality?
Two pieces for us. So very early on, the founders and the early folks sat around and came up with a company slogan, if you will, think, do, win. Think, do, win is ingrained in everything we do. And we do our very best. They did it with me. I do it with others. To try to define that for people, give people the autonomy and flexibility to be entrepreneurial, to do good and to constantly win. It goes beyond that. And we've had some purposeful, intentional conversations around what kind of company we want to be internally. Many of us grew up at Cerner and there was a very specific culture that wasn't always healthy, that wasn't always positive, but it's something that many of us thrived within. We talked about, do we want to be that kind of company? Do we want to, how do we want to grow this? And then for us, it's just been about adhering to that think, do, win, adhering to don't take ourselves too seriously. And I'll give you one simple culture point. Very early on, there was a client who asked the team that was on site, why aren't you wearing suits? And Sal Laporto, our CEO, he said he kind of panicked internally and he kind of hemmed and hawed. And this was the CFO of a very large health system he said, you shouldn't, because geniuses don't wear suits. And so that has permeated our culture in terms of,
We wear cards.
You're literally Mr. Awesome. You're as likely to get hit in the head with a football walking down the hall as you're for somebody to ask you, something really important. So I think keeping it light, keeping it purposeful and intentional, but also adhering to those common principles, I think is important.
Try that in your next interview, by the way. See how that one goes. Really, really good stuff. I know we got some questions that are coming. So let's see. There was a hand first up here. Mr. Travis.
Quick aside. First Christmas season I was ever at Cerner, I got on the elevator with Neil. I was dressed like that, but with a tie. And I got my suit, Travis. I went home and changed into the suit, and I never did that again. And
I said, hold on, I'm going to top you because, first of all, John Travis hired me at Cerner. This was my first manager at Cerner. But Dick Flanagan once threatened to send me home because I wasn't wearing a Cerner logo on my shirt, and I laughed. He said, no, I'm serious. So I immediately went down to the pro shop, bought some Cerner stuff, and there I was. That was what was expected. That's right.
my question is, you actually spoke of True North. Did either of you experience a time when your True North was not right? Or on the bedrock assumption of True North? Maybe if you did, and did you still put yourself in the shoes there, if that moment happened to you, would you be able to recognize it? So you have to pivot because I'm going to shoot that wrong. True North was off.
Can I just say that is the most unexpected question from John Travis, the regulatory expert? I love the question. It's a phenomenal question.
Well, the answer is the regulatory leader is always True North. I think that's the answer that he's trying to get us to.
We've had these discussions, try to define the North Star and get a line on so we're all, rowing and say directed or whatever. And I'm not going to say that we've been wrong so much as we've been irrelevant. Like we've come up with these plans for 5 years from now. This is what we want to look like. And that's helpful, but it doesn't help you decide what to do today sometimes. And so we went out far enough where it was like, we've got big dreams, right? And so with that, but you need to know what to do today. And so like we've made some those ideas help, but they're occasionally immaterial to what you're doing right now. And so if they're not informative and helpful and directing you, it's not really a north, right? It's just somewhere in outer space.
I think the way I would answer it is if you define true north by a particular tactic or a particular market or a particular measure of success, then you've got a lot more opportunity to be wrong. We would call that a pivot. Michael and I were talking earlier about, when you start a company, what you think is going to ultimately be your success is probably not. You have to be adaptable. If you center true north around what you want your company to be in terms of how it relates to the market, then I think it's harder to be wrong. Effectively define your value proposition, then you're more likely to be able to adhere to that while constantly pivoting. I think most successful business leaders would tell you they've been wrong more than they've been right. But I don't know it's so much about their true north it is about betting on a market or betting on a particular product. So that's how I would answer it.
Probably can arrive at it without.
That's right. Yeah, no, for sure. For sure.
Yeah. Brian?
This is for Michael, but that you will have a comment on alluding to it. But I'm curious with Digital Health KC, what they're doing, trying to foster entrepreneur community. There's organizations that are maybe in the same stage of where you are, or even a little bit earlier. And I wondered if you can comment on just some of your observations, lessons learned. You've got sort of this initial thesis of, hey, here's where we want to play and how we want to operate. It's going to start with some problem solving and innovation. And then there's kind of a couple steps after that, which is one, you need to monetize that. You're a business entity. How do you make choices on that? And that after that, you also have to think about commercializing it, meaning we're not going to be everything to everybody. We're not solving all these problems. We want to get into something that is going to be repeatable so that we have a sustainable entity that we go to market with. So I don't know, you could just reflect on some things that have worked there, or maybe some things, choices you made that didn't follow that, or just to give guidance to some folks already in that place.
The idea of whatever you start your business around is less than 1% of actually making the business. And they would have lived that so many different ways. And so like when we had our first in-person pitch, we had a platform developed, right? And we literally scrapped all of it because I went and worked with these women who were like, you want me to do what? I wouldn't do that right now. I would go do this, or I'm working in this way that would not be, you can't reflect it in this app. And we scrapped the whole thing. And so, what I would say when it comes to like turning it to a monetized product, and even piggybacking on the North Star comment, lower timeline North Star is ensuring that this interaction between an aide and a resident is a QN1, that they have all the things that they need, that they don't need to know all these clinical terms. I can just tell it what I'm going to do. I can interact with this human being and get them what they need when they need it. And so that being that sort of like shorter term North Star for this first product meant that we had to completely scrap everything. And if we didn't do that, then there wouldn't be an opportunity to monetize it, because we would just be forcing another ads on the stack that, that we would be telling administrators, make them do it and you will get what you want out of it. And there's just a gap there. And so I would say from the path from like idea to building a business to building a monetize, we're not to the commercialization step, but you have to be really perceptive about the ways in which it's being like used and criticized, because if you're not, then you will just have a bias for your own idea until it's dead. So you have to adapt to those things. And so if you're not willing, I don't suggest just taking everybody's feedback and putting it in a blender, but you have to understand the way that they're going to use it, where the criticisms are actually coming from, and whether or not it's going to solve the problem you meant to solve the first dose.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, going back to the conversation surrounding the characteristics that you were looking for, potential hires, and you have mentioned entrepreneurial, and then also you get comment about being able to afford, the best in the tech space. I know there's obviously a movement in companies like this where you do need the smart engineers that are sitting behind computers and doing stuff. As someone who is a clinician by background, who is now in health tech sales, I'm curious to know how you guys have addressed the idea, or what your opinions are on hiring clinicians or healthcare providers. A lot of the problems that we're solving are directly affecting these people that would potentially come into your companies with that buy-in, with that resiliency, because they've lived it and they've done it, and they have that drive to want to make a change too that the company is trying to do. So I was just curious.
So for us, we are following that path. We continue to hire technologists who, have an aptitude for technology. especially as we traverse more into more of a consultative, strategic world, we have brought on people who have run revenue cycle for large health systems. We brought in people who have operated both on the provider and on the vendor side. And what I would tell you from Cerner days and other experience, if you're selling into the clinical realm, there is no one better than a clinician, because the ability to authentically identify with the challenges that they're having is absolute. And we have multiple people at our company who have lived this world in enormous detail, but from the Cerner side or from, the tech side. And that's still not quite like being in the chair. So finding people who come from the provider when you're in healthcare, I think is incredibly important, regardless of the domain that came from, that they can both empathize with and then find ways to solve that problem.
I can say our first hire will be a clinician, know who he is. So, right, that's extremely valuable to us. And they're not just clinician, but within this industry. Like, there's so many different regulations about even Medicaid and Medicare work differently in these facilities than they do outside of them. So, like, it's very important to us, and that's it will continue to be.
Molly, I will say one thing that is a challenge is when you are looking to disrupt an industry or you're looking to truly innovate around processes. One of the challenges in talking to those clinicians, you need someone who understands and empathizes. But if they're so rooted in the way things have always been done, then that provides a challenge. It's something that I ask myself a lot, and this is kind of a silly, kitschy, but in what we're trying to do, and we use the tagline, reinvent revenue cycle. I think about how would Steve Jobs do that? Would Steve Jobs try to empathize with the challenge that people are going through right now in their jobs? And the answer is probably no, because what they're doing isn't working, right? So it requires, burning the boats, if you're familiar with, Clayton Christensen and Dual Innovation. But, so I think it's finding someone who is open-minded and innovative in that way. But if you can find that person who has both, that is the most extraordinary asset that you can find.
Early on, we had talked about this idea as that we're not doing it right now, but we had talked about being able to tell where aids are because our devices are pretty powerful, and being able to suggest like an optimized work list and staffing and all this, how it goes. My wife is a nurse, and she said, if you three dudes walk into a nursing floor and tell them that they have to do this your way without understanding it first, your business is going to fail. And she was 100% right. And so, like, again, going back to understanding the problem from that perspective, even if you're going to change how it's done completely, like that's what we need out of the clinician, and what I've been trying to glean as I've spent all this time in these facilities. But it's very important.
Any other questions? Yes, Doug.
So in 3 years, with the generative AI agents coming out, how do you think your business could be different as agents get more and more powerful? Where you see your business in 3 years from now?
We are implementing AI, and I think we're doing it with a pretty solid engineering foundation. You can't just one shot it and expect all the answers to be right. As where it sits right now, as far as I can tell, AI is not a tool for veracity. It's a tool for getting an answer in the format that you like and that you want to hear. And so you have to be very specific around the engineering behind it, which is the approach that we are taking. So I see it being very powerful for us, but it's really important to me that we solve a human problem, right? Like, it has to be able to empower this aid to help this person who's over 65, and we've had people ask us, won't this just be some iPad on a scooter eventually doing this? And I hope not, hopefully not in my lifetime, but the group that needs this cares. They're less comfortable with technology on average, and the human aspect of it it's so critical. We're going to use AI to help them do their jobs and not replace them.
For us, the answer is both an internal and an external one, a market one. Internally, AI will certainly change the nature of coding, change the nature of the way products are built, I think. And this is a concept that spans both the internal and the external, being really careful of glitz and over promises. I think that we're probably going to be in a pretty sustained churn cycle for belief in AI and what it will do, and the expectation that healthcare in particular is latched onto and thinks that tech will solve its problems and we don't have to address the processes within. So for us, it is about taking advantage of AI insofar as it provides additional scale internally, but then externally, because we are an automation and data company, we are enabling a bit of that future. And again, not getting too far ahead of the fact that AI will just solve your problems. Automation will just solve your problems, and taking a balanced approach, as Michael is describing, at both the human impact as well as the technological impact of how you create improvement and sustain that improvement. There's a lot of companies out there that talk about AI, and what they are is very complex algorithms. And that is the reality. And a lot of marketing budget goes into convincing people of that. So you got to be careful.
That marketing budget, first of all, went from saying predictive algorithms to replacing that with just AI. There was a find and replace in your documents. One additional comment, and then we'll bring this to a close on the AI piece. I'm incredibly bullish on the role that it will play in augmenting, extending, and amplifying what you can do in all aspects of healthcare. I've increasingly started thinking about the unexpected empathy that human beings possess. And when are you going to lose that unexpected empathy in an interaction because it skews heavily AI and not human? And that's not a reason not to do it, but it scares me that we could be hurtling down a path where unexpected empathy becomes a rare. I don't have a solution for that. Let's just throw that out to the crowd.
Yeah, wow. This just got really dark, everybody. Well, I'll tell you what, and I know we're coming up on time, but I took a ton of notes here, learning from you guys, just the different places that your companies are at. The commonalities were incredible and surprising to me. You talked about the importance of culture, about being entrepreneurial. What stood out to me was your network is your greatest IP. That really, man, that's incredible. Think, do, win. By the way, your tattoo is healing nicely. On that, I mean, just product fit versus market fit. Just, there were so many takeaways for me, Doug. Hopefully the same for you.
It's been a phenomenal. First, let's give them a round of applause.
Yeah, let's. Absolutely. And to that point, if you all have areas or topics that you want to dive deeper on, we're happy to do podcasts on these, bring guests on. So send those to us at the Counterweight. We'd love to hear your suggestions and feedback.
So just final closing thoughts. First of all, if you want to hear more of the Spark Change story, we have When It Rains, It Pours. We have a blessing. Christelle is going to be on the pod. Her episode drops on Friday. It was a phenomenal recording session. I would say maybe a little bit better than that. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure.
You're far better off with Christelle.
All the corrections we need to make. Yeah, good.
Fun competition going. But I would say a heartfelt thank you to Dick, Liz, Tanner, for letting us do this in partnership with Digital Health KC. I would say thank you to Matt and Michael for making the time, sharing this not just with the audience, but with the Counterweight audience, and appreciate everyone being here. We have a gift for you. I'm not going to do the awkward get up and walk around, but there's a card and a bottle of wine, and it's wrapped because it's the cheapest bottle I could find. But I wanted to make it look super expensive. Well, thank you from the Counterweight saying we appreciate. That's right. We appreciate you doing.
Only the best for you.
Thank you for listening. We are excited to bring new episodes out each week. We are incredibly grateful to our guests and our listeners. Let us know what you think by commenting on the episodes. We are proudly sponsored by the Upper Right Corner, which provides advice on strategic growth, including growth assessments and strategy, go-to-network planning, sales leadership and team coaching, and fractional leadership roles. For more, visit theupperrightcorner.com. Waypoint Healthcare Solutions is also proud to sponsor the Counterweight Podcast. Waypoint HCS is a focused consulting organization helping health systems, providers, and organizations to develop and implement patient engagement strategies. Waypoint HCS provides strategic consulting and patient engagement technology guidance and selection. Waypoint also helps support implementation and ongoing program management. For more, visit Waypoint HCS's LinkedIn page or waypointhcs.com. Thank you to our guests and our listeners. As always, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Subscribe, like, and follow, and we look forward to joining you again next Wednesday for another episode of The Counterweight.